Welcome back to the 294th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including two talking about what the Biden final 6 months is going to look like and how the Republicans should respond. Both of these pieces come from Republican outlets, so they're trying to strategize about how to message on this one. And then we're also going to talk about a story about Donald Trump going for the gold, aka Bitcoin, in this big speech that he gave in Nashville. And of course, we will end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, I've talked about how the 25th Amendment could very well be used. There could be a justification for it to get Joe Biden out of his current place in the White House. The idea would be, well, if he's not able to run his campaign effectively, why is he actually able to do the job that he's supposed to be doing, that he was actually running for? There's a little bit of contention, and I think there's even a counter argument to be made that, well, maybe taking on both is the hard thing, and he needs to focus on governing first. Yeah, you could probably list that out. But do you think that there is a actual better reason that there should be a 25th Amendment actually getting a tax plan on the books that is going to put more of the onus on the upper class, on the elite, and trying to make sure that the economy works for people from the middle up or the middle out and up, and however he phrases it ever so elegantly. Even though I don't actually think that's Joe Biden's policy, I think while he definitely put it out there on the campaign trail, I think that falls more in line with some of the supporters that he had in Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So what is he actually going to push? Because if you believe that he has had his faculties this entire time, then he'll continue to push what he's gone after these last 3-ish years. And if you believe that he has been trying to kowtow to certain parts of the party who have been able to empower him and allowed him to actually govern with some little tiny bits of popular support, then he's going to probably look at those people and say, well, hey, I don't need your votes anymore. Why do I care? And he's going to say, nope, I don't want to do any of your stuff. I want to go back to my moderate middle stance. I honestly he may not want to do anything. That's actually another fair point. If someone said to me, he wants to sit there and do absolutely nothing, be a complete lame duck, throw his support to Kamala whenever he needs it, make sure that the Democratic Party is unified throughout the course of the next few months, and just cement his legacy as the legendary president who stepped down akin to George Washington. Okay, some of those comments that you hear of people calling him George Washington, stop it. Stop it. He is nowhere close to George Washington. George Washington had the people basically begging him. He had his cabinet basically begging him to continue on, to be the person that everybody trusted within the nation, because he was a trusted voice. He was somebody that people looked to and said, you are a virtuous man. I would be willing to let you continue on. There were many people who didn't agree, obviously, but there were plenty, including Hamilton and Jefferson, who said that they would continue to serve underneath another Washington presidency. And he stepped down. He left it up to the people and said, hey, there's going to be another election, guys. I'm not the person that is going to sit on the throne of the American empire and ensure that everybody is loyal to me and my values. No, I'm going to let this democratic process, this little experiment that we created, the founding fathers, along with the people who came from every single state who were putting in their votes for their representatives, I'm going to let this experiment play out with the faith that those people and the next generations and their children will do what's best for this country. And that is not what Joe Biden's doing. What Joe Biden's doing is, so even if you want to be the most cynical about it, which is he was pushed out, then you have no argument to say that he's actually a George Washington figure because he didn't want to. But if you want to be the nicest about it and say, well, he just realized that he wouldn't be able to win, is he doing that for America or is he doing that for the party? Maybe you could say that he genuinely believes his message about the existential threat of Donald Trump and therefore he believes he's doing it for the country. I think more realistically, he thinks that the Democratic Party needs to be in control and they need to be making the policy decisions, and he's doing it because he doesn't want the Democratic Party divided over his candidacy if he is the one that's doing it of his own will. Many people are speculating that it's not actually him, that somebody else was really pressuring him, aka the Axelrods, aka the Nancy Pelosi's, and they basically forced his hand. But all of those things don't matter at this point because guess what? It doesn't matter why he's not doing it. He's not doing it. And now we need to look at what the final few months of his term are actually going to look like. And that's why we have this article here. So I want to go to one of the actually, it's going to be the third paragraph. Quote, Biden announced his historic exit with a social media post Sunday afternoon, then followed that with an 11-minute Oval Office speech that was supposed to provide more clarity about why he left. The president remained vague on the topic, saying, quote, nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. This includes personal ambition, end quote. So the reason I read this one specifically is because it highlights one of those arguments that I was talking about. It talks about the idea that he genuinely believes Donald Trump is a threat to the democracy, and if he does not have the ability to win and keep Donald Trump from becoming the president again, therefore endangering the democracy, then he will step down. But also, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's giving us the full inside peek. He's just giving us a little bit of rhetoric. He's giving us a little sprinkle on top. And let me step back again. So we may have forgotten, I don't think many people actually have forgotten, but we may have briefly forgotten that Donald Trump, less than a month ago, had a bullet shot at him at one of his rallies. And there were people that passed away at said rally. So this is a huge moment in American history when it comes to political violence in the modern era. And what did the Democrats do? What did multiple Democrats do? Multiple Democrats came out and said, we're praying for Donald Trump. We are saddened, very sad that this happened to him. And lots of people who are, especially on the libertarian side of things, were saying, whoa. If you actually think he is an existential threat, if you actually think that he will destroy American democracy, are you morally right to say, I'm happy to see, or I'm happy to hear that he's alive, I'm praying for him, I'm sending him my best wishes? And I think it's an interesting argument. While I think that it is a talking point more than it actually is a great point, there is still something to it, which is, if somebody is genuinely an existential threat and you believe that they will destroy the nation as a whole, do you actually wish them well after something like this happens? I would say it's courteous to do so, and that to appear politically moderate, you have to do so. But does that mean that you actually should? Does it mean that it's actually acceptable? Because if they're really that much of a threat, then you should want them gone, even if it has to be through violent means. Now, and let's be clear, I'm not endorsing violent means. That's not acceptable. The right answer is never violent means. And the right answer is always at the ballot box or through some sort of system where they, and I say ballot box because I don't want to just say it's in a general election. It can also be through a primary election. It can also be through the party process where they eliminate somebody. If that's really how we want to run our operations here and make sure that political violence is kept out of it, all of those things can be on the table. But if you genuinely think they're a threat, then why are you sitting there saying, especially when they're using words such as Hitler, and they're saying that he's the next Hitler, if you think he's that much of a threat, if he's on the historical equivalent of Hitler, then are you really going to wish him well? Are you really wishing that he is doing okay? Are you really praying for him? If you're a really good Christian, maybe you are. Maybe you are. If you are a really good Christian, maybe you are sitting there saying, you know what, guys. I don't care how much I disagree with him. I'm still going to pray for his soul. I don't, no matter how much I think he's a bad person, I'm still going to want to make sure that he's okay because he's a human being at the end of the day. And that is very above board. And I think that's honestly the empathy and the passion that we should have for these sort of things, especially with the moderate middle, how it's developed over the last few years, how they absolutely hate everybody. I think that that's a feeling that we could actually use again, rather than this hatred growing up in the middle, the compassion and love and looking for the person who is most willing to cross the aisle and engage in these sort of arguments, no matter how much you disagree, no matter how fervently you disagree with somebody. I think that could be a proper way forward in American politics, but it's getting harder and harder. But I have a hard time believing that they believe their own comments when they do things like this. When they say one thing and then the reaction to another event is completely antithetical to what they were saying the first time around. So, do I really believe that he thinks that him stepping down is saving democracy? No. I really don't believe that. I believe that it is rhetoric. And that is why I wanted to point that out. Because you can make that counter argument. I do not think it holds water. I think at the end of the day, they are sitting on their little campaign trail and they're saying, okay, what's going to be the most effective messaging? How are we going to make sure that we can really keep this from blowing back on us and having lots of extra questions and also stay on message for the next person, which is Donald Trump is the existential threat. So, with that being said, with explaining all of that, I know I kind of went off topic, but it was mentioned in the article, and that's why I had that whole discussion about why Joe Biden truly believes that he needs to step down. We're going to talk about what he wants to do in the next few months. So the one that he's always talked about, the cancer moonshot. Quote, I will keep fighting for my cancer moonshot, Biden said before the camera in his West Wing office, so we can end cancer as we know it because we can do it. Now, hey, great. Yeah, end cancer. I love the idea of that. That sounds wicked cool, man. 100%. Is it going to happen in 6 months? No. There's lots of great research that has gone into this field, especially underneath Biden, underneath Trump, even before that, underneath Obama. There was a little bit of it under Trump, but not necessarily, Bush, a little bit before that, but not really. So if you can get this done, amazing. I think that you're probably not going to. The next one is interesting because there's a possibility that they could at least get something on the books here. Supreme Court reform. And I'm going to read two different paragraphs from here. Quote, probably the most meaty policy proposal Biden mentioned was the goal of reforming the Supreme Court, which has become the target of criticism from progressives who say that high court justices need to be held to a higher standard of ethics. And then it goes on a few paragraphs later, quote, however, the Biden White House has kept details of its reform goals under wraps, even from key Senate Democrats who would be instrumental in implementing it. So, putting on a ethics rule onto the Supreme Court. Is it probably a good thing? Yes. If there is not, and let's be clear, I understand that the Supreme Court has created its own ethics rule, and for the most part, they have tried to be ethical in general. But guess what? The reason that we have a balance of powers, the reason that we have separate branches that have separate interests is so that they can check one another. And the legislator has the ability to create laws and check some of the other branches. So guess what? They should be able to check the Supreme Court. Making a formal ethics rule, I think, is probably going to be a good thing. Now, do I trust either side to make an honest ethics rule that is not biased against the other side? No. But I also believe that some of the political actors on either side are sitting there saying, we're not going to make the ethics rule too terrible, too vindictive on the other side, because maybe someday we will be in the position of being in the majority and them being in the position of wielding this rule that we're creating now to wield against them to wield against us in the future. So basically, the tables may flip, the sides may flip that are in control in the Supreme Court, and if they make a rule that is too restrictive, it will be used against them in the future. That's a concise way to put what I'm trying to say. So I think this could actually be something that's interesting. I think it actually could be a good little legacy bid for Joe Biden, which is he's not packing the court like he talked about, but he's at least putting in some sort of ethics restraints, and it could be seen as something that isn't bipartisan, because I genuinely believe there are some Republicans, even though they like the fact that the Supreme Court has more constitutionalists on it right now, they would at least be willing to put some of these restrictions on there because they do believe in trying to limit corruption matters. Now, will they do it for themselves? No, they'll have a hard time actually getting it passed on themselves, and they're fully aware when they propose some of these things, some Republicans and Democrats, that, well, maybe a few people will get up and talk about it, but someone else will find an issue, so I can kind of just virtue signal by proposing it. But when it comes to a different branch of government, they can actually propose this. It won't necessarily affect them directly, and they can go out there and say, hey, look, we put out this sort of reform. It was a bipartisan measure, and we want to ensure that this institution is not accepting money from other people, that this institution is not allowed to go to XYZ parties. They're not allowed to take XYZ as gifts, so on and so forth. I think, like I said, it probably will be a little too heavy-handed at first, but there are enough shrewd political actors that it could end up benefiting everybody if it's done right. Do I think it's going to be done right? Probably not, but it very well could be, and I would be interested to see what's going on here. Another reason is because the reform is actually restricting the power, or at least the actions of some of the individuals on the court. It's not necessarily saying we're going to fund if they do it right, they don't have to say, oh, we're going to fund a new oversight board and use more tax dollars. No, they just say, hey, these are the rules that are going to be in place. It doesn't take any more money to actually have them. We don't have to get an official scribe to write it up on gold paper and send out thousands of copies. So we're not going to necessarily increase the budget for it, and it's limiting the power of one of the institutions of the government, period, full stop. I think that a lot of people could get behind that. We don't want the government more involved in our lives, and we don't want it to have more power than it should. At least I would say that's the general American sentiment. Even people that don't pay attention to politics, those issues definitely resonate with people to some degree. So, with that out of the way, we've talked about some of the things that he could actually do. Now I want to talk about the messaging around the coming 5 months or so. And while the Washington Examiner is taking a matter-of-fact look at it, saying, okay, well, this is what he could do, this is a possibility, the Daily Caller's taken the look, which is, it doesn't matter what he's going to do, Republicans, just shut up. Do not ask for the 25th Amendment. Remember how we started this with the 25th Amendment? And there have been lots of calls to get Biden out to say, hey, whoa, why are you still in the presidency if you can't even run? We talked about how there is a cultural movement, at least on the right side of the aisle, for this. Well, the Daily Caller's out here saying, in the headline is, quote, just be quiet. Republicans calling for Biden resignation could be making a big electoral mistake, strategist says. And what's the idea here? So I don't want to necessarily read all of this article, and I don't want to take a whole bunch of excerpts from it, because if you want to read something like this and you want to get the exact opinion of the author, you should go and read this piece, because I am only a mouthpiece. I am only reading parts of it. I'm giving my opinion on top of it. I'm trying to add to it, and maybe you don't like my opinion, but you like this person's opinion. Remember, the links will be in the description below the like and subscribe button. Go find the articles. Go read them for yourselves, because this is an interesting argument that the author brings up, which is, remember how we have this weird phenomenon where people have a hard time imagining, and this is a psychological thing, it's not just in America. People have a hard time imagining what is possible until they see it. So a great example, you are proposing something to your boss. You are saying, hey, I want to implement XYZ program. And you just say, this is what I think would be a benefit of it, and these might be some drawbacks. What do you think? That's one thing. It's a type of proposal. And your boss is probably sitting there like, it sounds okay, maybe, but I don't know if we have the resources for it. I don't know how it works, so on and so forth. Even you explaining it doesn't necessarily make sense to me. And then you have another version of the presentation, which is, hey, boss, I've been working on something on the side. I know I'm taking up some of your time. Sorry, but here is my proposal for XYZ. Here is a mock-up of what I'm thinking. Here is what the format of XYZ is going to be. Here is a test model of the product that I'm trying to come up with. All of these different situations, you are providing something tangible or at least something usable that allows the person to see your vision. Not just believe in it, not just hear it and think it's okay, but actually see the results of your vision. And this provides them with a better opportunity to say yes or no. Because when you're bloviating about what this thing could be, that's one thing versus actually creating a mock-up and showing it to somebody and letting them use it. They have a better idea of what's going on simply because they can touch it, use it, interact with it, rather than having to imagine it and imagining all the things that are bad with it. Now, it goes both ways, of course, because then they can also see the issues themselves. But the author is making an argument here with Kamala Harris, which is if people have a hard time imagining her as a president, it's because they haven't seen her in the office. They've only seen her as vice president. They haven't seen her taking on the daily duties. And that could be a big hesitation for some people going to the polls. Well, if you want to keep it hard and you don't want to make it easy for people to imagine what a Kamala Harris presidency would look like, then you do not evoke the 25th Amendment. You do not keep calling for it and push Joe Biden out and then make it so that Kamala Harris is the president for a little bit. One, Kamala Harris would love that because at the end of the day, even if she doesn't win, she could at least say she was the president for a little bit. The first woman black president. That would be historic. It would go down in history books forever. Even if it has a little note on it, which is this was done by the 25th Amendment, it is still something that, wow, okay, she could put that on the resume forever. I don't know if it necessarily matters after that because you've kind of reached the top of the hill, but she could put it on the resume forever. She could get a few book tours out of it, no doubt. But also the inverse, or not necessarily the inverse, the other side of it is that now people understand, okay, this is what a Kamala Harris presidency would look like. This is the first woman black president. We're no longer having to worry about whether or not we can have a woman president. We're no longer having to worry about whether or not we can have a president as progressive as her. We've already had it. People can already imagine it. And also then she has the incumbent effect without all of the baggage of the Biden term, because guess what? She is her own person. Now she is no longer attached at the hip of Joe Biden as his vice president, because now she is her own person. She has 5 months to define herself. And guess what? She could just sit on her hands. She could sit there and say, you know what? I'm not going to do that much. I'm going to do the minimum. I'm not going to push any crazy legislation. I'm going to say that my term is a return to normalcy, and I want to spend this time actually talking to the American people. So then the people who aren't paying attention, they're saying, oh, well, hey, at least we're getting a few different campaign events. We can see President Kamala Harris. I mean, she already has the title. And the people who are really engaged, who may have, or at least the people who are mostly engaged and not necessarily understanding the politics behind it, but just engaged enough to see the news, are like, hey, she's not doing anything crazy. She's out there campaigning. That's what her main focus is. She's having a few different positions on the world stage, which she would have to do as the president. She couldn't get away with not having a foreign policy, or at least implementing some of it, but she could pretty much fly underneath the radar. And then those people in the middle would be like, oh, okay, look at that. She's a pretty inactive president. She is not taking the power of the executive and wielding it like a hammer against us. Or the inverse could happen. She could very well yield it, and the Daily Caller's argument would be something akin to the fact that she could implement things that people absolutely love. She could increase the amount of funding that is going into this student aid or the student debt relief programs. She could try to change the foreign policy on the Israel-Gaza war. And guess what? A lot of Americans, especially younger Americans, which have had a hard time really voting for the Democratic Party and going with Joe Biden during this election because of his position on Israel, maybe they could come back to Kamala Harris after this instance, because they're saying, hey, I actually agree with what she's doing here. So she could actually use it in multiple ways. She could use it as a hammer. She could use it as a bed to just slowly slip into the presidency again. And like I said, the main hurdle, which is, well, we've never had one before. She would be a first. It's a novel. The novelty's kind of gone. It's still there because it's only 5 months. So it's like, oh, okay, I don't have enough time to absolutely hate what she's doing yet. I don't have a year of bad policy. I have a year of a previous president's policy, and she's defining her own path. And at the same time, it's just novel. The novelty has worn off just enough that, oh, well, it's not the first time, so it's not historic. We don't have to overcome a hurdle in order to get there. It's already happened. And that last one is a psychological trick, which is you don't necessarily want to be the first. Whenever you're doing signups or something like that, whenever you're trying to, oh, there's a great example. So I was recently putting out food for an event, and I noticed that whenever the box was unopened, people had a really hard time opening the box. There very seldom were people that wanted to just open the box and get the first item of food out of there. What you had to do is open the box, take one or two out, make it look as though people are already liking it, they're already going for it, and more people would actually start to eat it. Another example is if you have a box of muffins, guess what? Cut them in half, like the really large Kirkland muffins, put them out there, cut them in half, and take one half away. Guess what? That small change still leaves a lot on the table for other people, but it shows people, oh, hey, there's a permission structure. People are already doing this. Not only do people feel as though they're not disturbing what's already there, in the case of the muffins and the food and everything like that, they don't feel like they're ruining anything. But in the broader sense, especially in this system that I'm talking about with our electoral system, it's no longer, oh, I have to be the first to put this person in there. I'm actually really bringing about this fundamental change to the system, which I know sounds weird when talking about muffins. That's why I'm trying to apply it to the broader democracy. Oh my gosh, the fundamental change to the muffin system. No. Oh my, I don't want to disturb it and make it an odd number. Actually, that's actually probably a really big mental hurdle for people with OCD. I'll be honest, I have a hard time sometimes getting rid of things when getting rid of one of them will end in an odd number. I like to always have even numbers if I can, or 5. It's even numbers and 5 for me, but that's because I'm a little bit odd with the way that I like to organize things. But the point being that not being the first, but being a part of a movement, being a part of propagating something that is novel, like I said earlier, yet still it feels as though it is already established. The incumbency effect is a thing for a reason. That, hey, this is just the status quo, and we're just keeping it going while also promoting this new figure on the American stage. I think that can be very, very, very powerful. And I do agree with the Daily Caller for the most part that trying to evoke the 25th Amendment and trying to get people to invoke it, it needs to be done a little bit more carefully than some Republicans are throwing around right now. All right, so speaking of Republicans, let's talk about the nominee for the GOP, and that is Mr. Donald J. Trump, and he was at a crypto event this weekend. This article comes from Rolling Stone. Headline, Crypto Giants Want to Buy Washington. They're bankrolling Trump to make it happen. And honestly, this article is just a whole bunch of the crypto elite quoting, hey, we don't want Harris. Oh, Harris isn't for us. Trump is for us. We want to make sure that America's great again. We want to limit the amount of regulations. And the reason I wanted to have this article is not to read all of those quotes. I want you to go read those quotes if you're really interested. But I wanted to bring up the topic of the crypto market having enough power in order to buy and put money into super PACs in order to influence the election and get the result that they want. This is how powerful the crypto industry is now. And when I say powerful, I'm not saying that they're the Wall Streets quite yet, but the normal Wall Street firms have started buying into crypto, holding a certain amount of assets. But the point being that this tech Silicon Valley contingent who believe in the cryptocurrency and are actually, it's interesting, using the system, the capitalist system within America and the funding system within America and the election process in order to subvert the American dollar. Because I'm going to be honest, that's what crypto's going to do. Even if the USA comes out with like a USA coin or US coin or Fed coin, whatever it may be, right now, how the structure is going to work is it's going to be independent blockchains that have trusted architecture and have the confidence of people that are using them, just like any other fiat currency. There are a few exceptions. There are some coins that will be tied to hard assets. There's no doubt about that. Or there's one that's currently pegged to the US dollar. So there are going to be a whole bunch of these different coins. But the point being is that it's no longer just centralized into one currency, or at least one fiat currency, such as the US dollar within the economy. And they're actually using the system that the US has set up in order to subvert the system. They're using the funding system to say, hey, we're going to get somebody who's going to bring in people who don't want to regulate crypto, who actually want to let crypto flourish and therefore build up the infrastructure and the industry so that someday it could replace these sort of currencies. And it's so interesting to me, and I find it absolutely hilarious because I'm sure that Donald Trump knows that they're just giving money because they want their crypto assets to be more valuable. They want their businesses to thrive. They see it as the future, especially with blockchain technology, being able to trace things back to its original sender and user, which could be interesting for like surveillance states. But that's besides the point. For all of you who love the crypto industry, make sure you're at least paying attention to these sort of things. It's not as anonymous as you would think, and technocrats are going to absolutely love it because trying to filter it through a whole bunch of black accounts, black market accounts, things like that, it may not necessarily be as easy as you think to hide your transaction, but just keep that in mind for all those who are believing in the libertarian crypto future, so on and so forth. But my point being that they are using the system as it exists in order to bring about the destruction, or at least the alteration in a fundamental way of that system. And that's what I find absolutely hilarious. And for any of you who don't believe that they're doing that, they're just doing it for their own ends, their own money, that's definitely part of it. But for any of you who do not believe that these tech billionaires and tech millionaires don't believe that crypto can provide a way to extend beyond the US dollar, that it can provide a replacement for different economic models and actually upend the way we do things now, you think too little of these millionaires and billionaires. Maybe I think too much of them. That's fair enough, but you think too little of them. So I think it's just hilarious. It's kind of deeply ironic. And of course, they would attach themselves to the anti-establishment Donald J. Trump. So, with that said, we gotten all those stories out of the way. Let's jump into our daily delight. And this one comes from Parade Pets. Belgian Milanese puppies join yoga class and the cutest chaos ensues. And these guys, oh my goodness, with their ears propped up, they're absolutely loving the yoga class. They're loving having fun with everybody. If you need something joyous, or if you want to find one of these classes yourself, you can go through the article. I believe they actually have resources in there to find them. Don't quote me on that because I read this article the other day, but go give it a look. Put a little smile on your face. Maybe do a little bit of yoga in your living room with your dog early in the morning, and maybe you can just experience just a little bit of the joy and happiness that some of these people are experiencing. So, with all that said, if you want to check out any of today's articles, they'll be in the link in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So, with all that said, there's only one. Stay safe, don't die.